My final take is that we are in a period of change, and L&D needs to stop being focused on the tools and start being focused on the goals. If we remain committed to and seeing ourselves as producers of content, there's a risk that we lose any importance we might have. If, on the contrary, we focus on productivity and output and making things better, then we can shift from being a fulfillment house of training to a strategic role. In short, the choice is between irrelevance and influence, and I think we have to make that choice this year or next. Things are moving fast.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are and wherever you're watching from. My name is Matt Pierce. I'm the host of Visual Lounge. Today, we're talking with Donald Taylor, who runs a report, the L&D Global Sentiment Survey, which is just a fantastic insight. What are people in learning and development excited about? What are they looking forward to? What is on their minds? It's not a treatise of what's going to be, but it is got people fired up. And he shares some valuable insights, not only about the report, about trends that we're seeing, but also if you stick around, there's some really great information that his view of AI, which was the number one thing that people said they were excited about in the report. So let's get into this. Let me go ahead and introduce Donald Taylor. A recognized commentator and thinker in the fields of workplace learning and supporting technologies, Donald is committed to helping develop the learning and development profession. He has chaired the Learning Technologies Conference in London since 2000 and writes and speaks worldwide about learning and development. His annual L&D Global Sentiment Survey, started in 2014, provides a unique perspective on L&D trends from over 100 countries. He chairs the Workforce Development Board for VC firm Emerge Education and invests in and advises several edtech startups. From 2010 to 2021, he chaired the Learning and Performance Institute. He is the author of Learning Technologies in the Workplace, a graduate of Oxford University, and in 2016 was awarded an honorary doctorate by Middlesex University in recognition of his work developing the L&D profession. With that said, please welcome Donald Taylor to the Visual Lounge. Donald, thank you so much for joining me today here in the podcast.
Great to be here.
So Donald, one question we like to start with people off on is just, you are someone who you look across a lot of technology. Not actually sure if you use a lot of images or video in your work, but looking at the study that we're going to look at, a lot of great graphs, visuals. Do you have a tip for people who are in L&D about using video or images, that things that you would say to them like, hey, this would make it better for us all if you just did X?
Don't assume people know as much as you do. So particularly when it comes to portraying graphs and numerical data, it is very easy to stick a graph in front of people or a table of information and say, look at this. And while you're explaining it, people can be completely lost because there's so much going on. They can't help themselves trying to read or examine the whole thing. So it's much better to build your story up. Generally, this is true anyway, but much better to build your story up if it's a graph or a table of data, bit by bit, keeping your co-locutor, the person you're speaking to, keeping their attention focused where you want it to be. Because if you don't do that, it's likely to stray, and you've either lost them or you've added tremendously to the cognitive overload. So to sum up, don't assume they might know as much as you do. Build it up bit by bit.
I love that. Kind of a scaffold approach towards the understanding and learning. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Donald, the reason we asked you here today is you've done for the last several years the L&D Global Sentiment Survey. And this is something I've been following personally because I'm so fascinated by the learning and development industry, things that are happening within the field. To get us started, give us a little bit of background about how did this come about and what's its purpose?
Well, it came about just by accident. We had a conversation with some friends once, and I said, I need to put something on my blog. But this was 12 years ago, and I need to put something on my blog. What should we do? It's got to have legs. It's got to last, but it's got to be simple. And very quickly, in the space of about 10 minutes, we came up with the idea. And then over the following 3 years, it was refined until it reached the status it is right now, which is one obligatory question with 16 optional answers. You could choose 1, 2, or 3 of those. And that's it. Why do we do it and why is it useful? The aim is to try to get a pulse check of an awful lot of people, thousands of people worldwide in L&D. Now, nobody else does this, and it's useful precisely because nobody else does it. And it measures something which nobody else looks at. The aim is to find out what are people excited about at the beginning of the year, not what their plans are, where they're going to spend their budget, but what are they excited about? The reason for that is that it is very easy to ask people a question about what they're going to do. And we don't know if they're telling the truth or not. And nobody ever asks them at the end of the year, did you actually do those things you said you were going to do? So there's an awful lot of survey data that is much less solid than it appears. It's just a bunch of people saying, well, I think we're going to do this stuff. I'm trying to be pretty honest about it. It's no more than what people feel and think, and it's designed to be done very quickly. So we get a pulse check. What do people feel? And it's both what they feel is hot and also what their concerns are. But then from that, it's possible to say, right, looking at this data, and we have some predictable things that are happening over time, and it's quite predictable that, for example, Brazil will vote this way or Ireland will vote that way. And looking at that information, you can then start to make guesses globally and locally. What is going to move from just the realm of people being excited about it to being something that people use regularly in their work? And it's that movement from being of interest to the early adopters to being generally accepted and used by the early majority that I'm really interested in.
Yeah. So first of all, I have to say, I love that content, a need for content has not changed, right? Like we're all trying to fill our blog or social or LinkedIn or whatever. But I love the simplicity of it. And I do think you're in the report, you're very good about calling out the fact that there are caveats to this data, right? That it's not just, because you said something I think is really key that happens in research is we don't know what they're actually going to do. So I do think this is an interesting way to approach that from the kind of longevity point of view of the years that you've been doing this. How accurate, you said that, you get to start to see people are excited about it. Early adopters obviously get really keyed into things. And then you got your laggards. It might take 5, 10, 20 years for laggards to move. How accurate have you felt like that's been from a early adopter excitement to kind of seeing some implementation of some of these ideas that have come up on the survey over the years?
Well, the first thing that topped the survey in 2014 was mobile delivery. And that went from being something that was really hot and interesting and everyone was amazed by it until I took it off the survey a couple of years ago because it was no longer something which, certainly in the Western developed economies, was something that is a key delivery mechanism. Now, having said that, I kind of regret taking it off because I know that in South Africa we got some good detail about it, and it was much more important there as a way of leapfrogging traditional legacy landline systems and other delivery mechanisms in a very large, sparsely populated country. It's also very, very popular in Italy for lots of different reasons. So I kind of feel maybe I took it off too early, but that is certainly an example of something that went from being right out on the left-hand side of the adoption curve with the innovators and the early adopters right the way through to the early majority. And now it's probably early majority, late majority in terms of it being absorbed. It was no great act of prescience to guess that mobile delivery was going to take off. It's more interesting, I think, probably to look at other things and say, okay, there are 3 categories any option can fall into. It can either go business as usual, it can go niche, or it can go what I call wallflower. And a wallflower option is something that gets invited to the dance, but nobody dances with it. So it stands around the edges like a wallflower. It's something everyone is excited about, but nobody actually puts to use. Curation is a good example of that. So the trick is to be able to say, well, look, we know mobile delivery is going to take off. That was pretty straightforward. Is it possible to make a guess between virtual reality and curation? Is one of those going to go mainstream? Is it going to go into a niche? Or is it going to be a wallflower? And I don't think I actually put it in any of the reports, but it was very clear to me that VR would go niche and that curation would be a wallflower for various reasons. There's something I don't publish in the report itself, which is the difference between Group A and Group B. And Group A are the people who vote early on in the survey. And they typically respond to social media, first email messages and so on. And these people are the ones who are right at the edge of the adoption curve, the very excited ones. The results for that first group, which isn't that big, it's a few hundred, and the rest of the cohort, which is probably about 3,000 people, is quite marked. The ones who are out at the edge, they're always more excited by the latest, newest thing and less excited by things that have been around for a while. And they're always keen on new methodologies like curation. And the trick is to see, do those ideas migrate from the first group, Group A, the early responders to the survey? Do they migrate later on in subsequent years to the second group, to the people who respond later? When they don't migrate, then it's quite possible to say that idea is not going to take off, because if it can't make it from Group A to Group B, it's not, which is roughly corresponding to innovators and early adopters, it's not going to make it to the early majority. So, very long answer to your question, but I think the answer is yes, it is quite possible to make predictions based on the data we get.
So I'm curious about that because, first of all, I'm blown away that there's a group of people who are the first responders that are so quick, and it parallels the fact that they are also early adopters of all the other technology.
Exactly.
And it makes sense, but it's surprising to be able to maybe see that in the data to me. But what I'm curious is when those early adopters are picking up things, and then you can see it is or is not transferring to the kind of the secondary group. Do you feel like there's any influence that's happening there? Because I do see this in L&D. We have I hear my colleagues talk about it as the shiny object syndrome. We like a lot of shiny things. We like the new things, and I think the people I'm probably talking to a lot are on the early adopter kind of spectrum there. But do you think there's influence that's happening to drive that down, or is it really still a very natural progression of kind of the way of the world? But I'll give maybe a clearer example here. I go to a lot of conferences. I know you attend a number of conferences as well. And you can see certain topics getting kind of picked up. A number of years ago, microlearning was like, if you had a session on microlearning, it was going to probably get picked up. Right now it's AI. And we'll talk about AI here in a few minutes. But I'm just curious if there's do industries drive those things down to Group B? Is it just natural, because it's useful, or maybe we just don't know?
I think the short answer is we don't know. The longer answer is there's a sort of ecosystem of influence. And a lot of it is subconscious as well. I talk quite a lot about what I call the wordscape, which is the words that surround us on the internet in written form and even spoken form as we make our way through life. And the wordscape influences us, I think, probably more than we realize. And it does it subconsciously. During the pandemic, collaborative and social learning picked up on the survey. And I always told myself that this was because, during lockdowns, people were craving social interaction. But I do wonder if there was another reason for it, which is simply that the word social was used an awful lot during lockdowns in terms of social distancing and so on. And just the repetition of that word may have been enough to alter people's perception and make people feel more positively disposed towards that particular option on the list. We don't know about that. We do know with things like reskilling and upskilling that it is possible to trace particular points of inflection of interest in these things to particular moments of surveys being released. And you can track a Google Trends graph for reskilling and upskilling against the release of certain reports. And you can find that, I think it was January the 20th, 2023, that the particular report was released on reskilling and upskilling. And there's a week afterwards, there's a peak in searches on Google Trends, which doesn't go back to where it was beforehand, but acts as a sort of ratchet of increasing people's interest. And so there's a regular increase in people's interest in things as a result simply of the words they hear, regardless of whether it is conscious or not. The last example I'll give of that is that in 2022, reskilling and upskilling generally was coming down the table. It was still number one in most countries, but it was coming down as a result of it having been around for a while. But in Sweden, it leapt from quite a low position the previous year, third position, to number one in their table, and it had 17% of the vote, which was a huge number. And when I spoke to the Swedes about this, I said, look, I'm not quite sure. Is this an aberration? Is my data wrong? They said, no. What happened was you bring the survey out in November, December time. Per Lager published a book called, I think it was called Upskill, Up, Reskill in September. So everybody was talking about this and the words were in circulation around it just as people went into doing the survey. So it doesn't mean they were necessarily focused on it as a topic, more that it was part of their wordscape. So there are lots of ways people get influenced, but one of the most fundamental, I think, is, as I say, just the words that surround us. And I think it is possible to track that and show that it's definitely having an effect. Whether it's conscious or not, you can't say, but I can't believe it's conscious all the time.
Well, I have to wonder, I want to talk about the AI results, but I do think I wonder right now about AI. It is prevalent everywhere we go. I was at DevLearn this last November, and just walking through the expo hall, almost every booth had AI something, right? And so I think it is just there's this constant awareness right now of what is happening. And I do wonder, besides the technology changes, the influence it has, the things that it can do, that it is in the constant kind of just churn of conversation. So let's talk about AI and the results, because I know there's some surprises here that you saw that when we talked previously, you had mentioned. So I'm curious, what is the results of the survey showing about AI kind of, and what's the trajectory you think we're going in?
So the first thing that I was surprised about with AI is that the vote went up this year, because the vote last year was an absolutely record-breaking 21.5% of all the votes cast were for AI. And that's just historically absurdly high. We hadn't had anything more than 13% previously, and this was almost 10% more. Extraordinary. So I said to myself, well, it won't go any higher than that this year. And of course it did. This is a lesson that if something is record-breaking and unprecedented, well, maybe the past is not a good place to look for lessons about what it will do next. So it had already broken records once. Guess what? It went on to break a record again this year and top the table. So is it going to keep going up? Is it keep going to top the table? I think it will top the table next year if I keep it on, which I probably will do. But I think there is one straw in the wind, if you like. There's one indication that it may be about to come down, which is that the USA generally leads the charge on technology. And what will happen is the USA will vote for something, the rest of the world won't vote for it that year, but they'll come on board the following year, at which point USA may have moved on to something else and the vote is actually falling away. And then in the third year, both USA and the rest of the world haven't voted for this thing as much. That's exactly what happened with with micro-learning, which over the course of 3 years, 2016, 17, 18, went from nowhere but favoured by the US to favoured by everybody, with the US falling off, to everybody now being less interested in it. Very, very discernible pattern. USA has been leading the voting on AI, and last year, 24.3% of the USA votes went to artificial intelligence, but this year, 20.4%, which is almost 4% low. That's a really big fall. Now, that bigger fall suggests to me that maybe things are going off the boil in the US. There may be other reasons for it as well. But it'd be very interesting to see next year if the USA vote continues to fall and the rest of the world then follows suit. And I don't think it will be anywhere other than number one on the table, but it might have a slightly smaller vote. And then what will be interesting for me is, what are people voting for instead of AI? Once the tide, if you like, starts to go out, where do people pick up votes for other options?
Setting the survey aside, I know you're someone that has looked at particularly the use of AI and L&D, and I think one of the things that's interesting to me is there's a lot of interest in it as a technology, and still a lot of unknown of what it can and can't do, what it will do well, what it won't do. It's still obviously we're early days of development. I think with that there comes this fear as well, and I know the survey doesn't talk about like, hey, am I afraid of what's going to happen to my role because of AI or because of any of these things? But I do wonder, from just your perspective personally, where should L&D, like if L&D we're excited about it, but what should we be doing about trying to maybe incorporate or use AI, or maybe prepare ourselves for the reality that AI is going to do some things that L&D professionals maybe have traditionally done that they no longer will be needed to do, or maybe AI will prove to do better. Any thoughts that you'd share with us?
Loads of thoughts. It's a completely separate podcast. We'll have to run an entirely new interview. I did 3 bits of research on this with Eglvin Elskeiter, who's based in London, super bright woman, who's just an absolute force of nature. She helped put together these 3 reports, but the last 2 of them include 13 case studies about people actually using AI. So it's not a matter of hypothetical stuff. This is things that are actually going on. It's very interesting that the mental state, the worldview of the people who are using AI well is very different from the other people who are concerned about it. The people who are concerned about AI rightly see it as a threat for the reasons you spelt out to their jobs and their roles. The people who are using AI broadly and deeply in specific instances or across organizations see it in an entrepreneurial spirit as something that can get a job done. So in other words, the first group is much more married to the tasks they do. The second group is focused on the goal they're trying to achieve. And when you say AI may do some things better than we do now, of course it will. And I get very tired of people saying, it's all right, everyone's going to keep their jobs. No, simply not the case. And it's not the case in L&D or in anything else. If you're in translation, your job has been very badly affected by AI already. If you're in stock photography, ditto. If you're in marketing or general bump, as we say, copywriting, the stuff that you put on the back of a book or you put here or there, the stuff that sort of fills out texts and manuals, what have you, that stuff can already all be written by machine. So it's not just L&D. Loads of people are going to be affected by this. Now, if that's going to happen, if people are going to start losing their jobs, then the first group of people who are concerned about their jobs are rightly afraid. I would put it this way. I think that there is an existential threat to learning and development, which is that if we associate ourselves too closely with the business of producing content, there's every chance that people will stop going to L&D to get that content and either outsource it to a specialist third party that uses AI very well, or just get people in-house to use AI very well to produce the content. Now, will the content be as good? Maybe not, but it will be vastly cheaper than doing it through the L&D department. And for most organizations, the fact that it is slightly less effective as a learning resource matters far less than the fact that it is hugely cheaper. So if we associate ourselves purely with content, we're likely to end up being forgotten, ignored, and irrelevant. If we use AI not just to create content, but to go far beyond that, to look at all the data points in the organization and consider how can we use those to improve performance, partly through learning and also in other ways, then absolutely we can be not just avoiding getting laid off, but we can build a greater strategic influence in the organization. If you can go to the boss and say, hey, look, we're going to be running out of engineers in 6 months' time, I can predict that. And by the way, here's a cohort of 20 people in the organization who are the best placed to be trained up on adopting this new engineering role. And here's a program for them that will get them up to speed in time. That is absolutely solving a problem using technology, which is very difficult to solve otherwise, but can be done. Or you might just say, look, I want to get our customer service reps better at their job. I'm going to take our tens of thousands of hours of transcripts of conversations with customers, put them into a machine, and we're going to work out what is the best way of dealing with customers and train people on that. Now, both of those examples are absolutely already in place and already happening. So this is not Gen AI. This is using the wider definition of AI, that it's a way of crunching and manipulating data at scale and making a difference to people's lives. That's what AI, that's what L&D has to get its head around, the fact that it's possible to change the way we do our job in order to achieve our goal of increased personal and organizational productivity far better. Let's not get obsessed with the tools. Let's get obsessed with the outcome.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And particularly you said that this idea that we can't be married to the task. The tasks that we do today are not really what's the key. It is understanding greater how do we amplify the business? How do we show value that the AI can't? So I appreciate that. And I know some people get really worried, but I think the reality is it's just like everything, things change, right? Every organization has change, every period of time has change, and we are just happen to be in one that is particularly rapid, which
and
hard.
Let's not underestimate it. Let's not downplay it. It is a huge period of change. Some people's lives are going to be disrupted and quite negatively. We can't ignore it. We can't say everything's all right and pretend and then be suddenly hit from the side. Let's face up to it, recognize that there are issues here, and take action. Otherwise, we're not doing ourselves any good, and we're not doing the organization or the learners any good.
Yeah. Well, Donald, thank you so much for that insight. I do want to keep us moving along here, and I want to go on to our speed round questions, so get a chance to get to know you a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. For those who haven't watched the podcast before, quick, fast answers determined by the roll of dice. So here we go. All right, we've got our dice tower, so we're going to roll this 12-sided die. We've got 12 questions, and Donald, the first question for you is, you've done a lot of things in your life, but if you had to choose to change to a different maybe tact or focus, I normally say career, but I don't know if that quite makes sense for you. But out of the world maybe of L&D, what would you do? What would you focus on?
When I was 17, I wanted to be a nuclear physicist. I wanted to join the Joint European Torus and solve the problem of fusion and make free and cheap electricity available to all. I wasn't quite good enough at the maths. I was lucky enough to be in a school with a bunch of people who were really smart, so I wasn't quite good enough. Probably it was right that I didn't go into it, but if I was smart enough, that's where I'd go.
I love that. And we could use some good energy. You know, who doesn't need free energy? Yeah. All right, next question is number 5. So this goes right along with the L&D Sentiment Survey. If you could instantly acquire a new skill, you know, no cost to you, you just get it, what would it be and why?
Fluent Italian.
All right. Why Italian?
Because I'm going on holiday to Italy this year. Literally, in an hour's time, I've got my first tutorial lesson with somebody to help me start learning Italian. I'm reasonably good and confident at learning languages, but I would love to just skip to the end point and be able to speak it fluently.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I am not, you know, as a typical kind of person from the United States, I don't have language skills, but my children do. I have a son that speaks Spanish and one that's learning Tagalog, which is the Philippines. And it is amazing to be able to have those skills. So I agree. A language would be a great skill to acquire. So, all right, let's do one more. Let's do question number 4. Ooh, what's a guilty pleasure song or movie that you love to
That's a terrible question. Straight up, Miss Confidentiality. Is that the one with Sandra Bullock? Where
it is.
She's an FBI agent and she goes undercover. Honestly, that is a complete hoot. I love it. And of course, I think you're the first person who's got me to confess to this live on camera. But I swore I would tell the truth, so there we are.
Well, it is, and it is a great movie. So for what it's worth, I'm right there with you. Some great quotes from that movie. We talk about it every April 24th is the perfect day. All right. Well, Donald, thank you so much again for sharing your insights. We're going to link to the Global Sentiment Survey in all of our places that we post this. As we wrap up, though, if people wanted to reach out, they want to connect with you, they want to, be involved in the Global Sentiment Survey each year, where should they turn?
Connect with me or follow me better on LinkedIn, and that's where you'll find out all the information about the research and publishing, and you can get a chance to get hold of the reports and be involved in their publication.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they want to see you in person, LT UK is coming up in April sometime, so the show might be out.
Why why would anybody want to see me in person? If they do, I'm at LT and I'm in a bunch of other places as well. I do a lot of traveling and speaking. So yeah, just go to the website, donaldhtaylor.co.uk, and there's a list of them there.
Perfect. We love it. Well, Donald, as we wrap up the show, we ask our guests the same thing every time. What is your final take?
My final take is that we are in a period of change, and L&D needs to stop being focused on the tools and start being focused on the goals. If we remain committed to and seeing ourselves as producers of content, there's a risk that we lose any importance we might have. If, on the contrary, we focus on productivity and output and making things better, then we can shift from being a fulfillment house of training to a strategic role. In short, the choice is between irrelevance and influence. And I think we have to make that choice this year or next. Things are moving fast.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Donald, for joining me on the Visual Lounge.
Great to be here. Thank you so much, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you. Again, I want to thank Donald Taylor for joining me in the Visual Lounge. It's exciting to talk with people who have a great view of what's going on in learning and development and across many industries. And I want to reemphasize what he said. We can't be focused on the task as much as we need to be focused on providing good value to our organizations, particularly when it comes to AI, but that could be applied to a lot of things as well. So what we like to do here at the Visual Lounge, if you like what you're hearing, first of all, let us know. You can email us at thevisuallounge@techsmith.com. Of course, you can always, follow us on social media, that good stuff. We like a like or subscribe. That does help make sure you get in the know when a new episode comes out. But here's the thing. We're all about growth and development here. We want you to learn more about using images, video, and technology to be able to boost up what you're doing, not just to do the task, but to add additional value. And we hope that you're taking a little time to level up every single day. Thanks, everybody.